With the new M3 MacBook Pros, Apple's laptop family is finally starting to make sense again this year. Think about it. Ever since the switch over to Apple Silicon chips, the company has been juggling older laptop designs that were originally developed for Intel chips and a few modern designs too. So this year, we pretty much have things settled. There's the MacBook Air 13-inch, which was redesigned last year. Looks pretty great. We gave that a pretty good review. And there's also a 15-inch MacBook Air, which debuted this year. That one came a little late. We also saw the M2 MacBook Pros earlier this year, which I liked, but I do think that these new M3 chip models are a clear sign of where Apple's headed next. The most important change this year, to be honest, is something Apple didn't really talk about very much, but they have officially killed off the 13-inch MacBook Pro, which I reviewed last year, and I called it pretty much Pro in name only. I really hated that machine because it was slow, it had the older Intel design, and the MacBook Air last year just looked much better. So now instead, there's a $1,599 MacBook Pro 14-inch model, the cheapest that model has ever become, which makes that much more accessible to a lot of people. With that cheaper 14-inch MacBook Pro, it looks like Apple's entire MacBook Pro line is actually geared towards professionals, whereas I think that 13-inch was just super confusing and not something anybody really should have bought. So now Apple's lineup is just really clear. But by actually focusing on professionals, it also looks like Apple is kind of breaking down the meaning of what a professional can be. That $1,599 14-inch model, for example, is a little confusing, right? It has the lowest power M3 chip, but it's also only limited to 8 GB of RAM, which doesn't really sound very professional to me. Apple also took away one USB-C port on the right side of the computer for the base M3 models, which just restricts what this computer can actually do. And another thing worth noting, that base M3 MacBook Pro 14-inch also can only output to one external display. There's no multi-monitor support. So basically, this really just looks like a curious machine, and it's one reason why I'm not really recommending the base $1,599 model. I'd recommend spending the couple extra $100 and get 16 GB of RAM. If you really want a multi-monitor setup though, you'll need an M3 Pro system, which starts at $1999. You'll have to shell out $2399 to get the full power of that M3 Pro chip with a 12-core CPU and 18-core GPU. Demanding users can jump up to the $3199 M3 Max 14-inch model, which has a 14-core CPU and a 30-core GPU. Pricing hasn't changed at all for the 16-inch MacBook Pro. It still starts at $2499, and it is really meant for more demanding users. Also new this year is a space black color option, which honestly looks more like charcoal gray to me than a true space black. It also has a new anodization process that can reduce fingerprints, and in my testing, that certainly worked. I saw less greasy fingerprints on that compared to the Midnight MacBook Air or any of Razer's laptops, to be honest. Any black computer has this problem, so it's nice to see Apple working towards finishing it. I just wish this computer was actually all black. And another downside, it's not available on the base M3 model for the 14-inch MacBook Pro, so that just seems weird. If you really want this color, you're gonna have to bump up to the M3 Pro. On the outside, really nothing has changed with the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. They're still using the new redesign that Apple debuted 2 years ago with the Apple Silicon chips, and it still looks good. I don't have any complaints here. This is a sleek-looking laptop. It has a beautiful metal finish, and it is understated, unlike a lot of PC superpowered laptops, so I'll always appreciate that about these MacBook Pros. Most importantly, these feature Apple's best screens, the Liquid Retina displays. These screens still look great, and this year they also have an extra 100 nits of brightness for SDR content. So that's just general web browsing or, doing productivity work. It'll look a little bit brighter than before, and that makes it really useful for outdoor computing. They also have Apple's ProMotion technology to get up to 120 Hz refresh rates. To me, that is a big reason to upgrade over something like the MacBook Air. And just for some background knowledge, we're reviewing these computers together because they're really essentially the same machine, except one is a little bigger. Here are the key numbers you need to remember. The 14-inch MacBook Pro weighs just 3.5 pounds, which is not that much more than the MacBook Air. But the 16-inch model weighs 4.7 pounds, and you can just really feel that. That makes it tougher to fit into bags. It makes it tougher to just lug around. It's not gonna fit in plain trays, very easily. It's not gonna fit in skinny cafe tables. And for my writing purposes, a 14-inch system is just fine. So just think about that. If you're wondering about the size differences, go to a store and just get your hands on these things because that 16-inch model is really big. For our review, I tested the 14-inch MacBook Pro with an M3 chip and 16 GB of RAM, as well as the 16-inch model that was fully decked out. It had the M3 Max chip, it had 128 GB of RAM, it had an 8 TB SSD. This is the most insane system I've ever tested, so it was just kind of wild to even just hold it in my hands. And during my testing, there really weren't any surprises. You know, the M3 chip proves to be really great at productivity work. We already saw that with the M1 and the M2. Now it's just a little bit faster and, a little more capable. In the usual benchmarks we run, like Geekbench 6 and Cinebench 2024, both the M3 and M3 Max models showed slight improvements over the M2 variants and much bigger gains over the M1 chips. And that's really where I think the difference is here. But if you have an M1 system, there may be some performance gains that you want to get from this that you don't have in your current models. Certainly if you're a video editor or you're working for a corporation, they may just want to pay whatever it takes to get the fastest chips right now. Another big improvement with these computers is gaming. The M3 chips bring in real-time ray tracing and a bunch of other high-end GPU features. I didn't really get to see much of that in my testing, but I played a couple games that are surprising to have on the Mac platform at all. That includes Lies of P, which is a pretty recent game, and it performed really smoothly on the 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M3. I was running it at 1920 by 1200 with all the graphics settings maxed out. It ran silky smooth, it looked like 60 FPS to me, and I was playing with an Xbox controller too, which felt a little unholy on a Mac. The MacBook Pro 16-inch could go a little bit higher in terms of resolution. Again, just a great experience overall there. Baldur's Gate 3 works really well on both systems. I had to scale down the resolution a bit on the 14-inch MacBook Pro, but still looked great. It looked certainly console quality to me. And the best thing is that game is on Steam, so it is cloud syncing with my PC, and I could just play across different systems. This is the dream of PC gaming, folks, and finally Macs can participate in it. When it comes to ports, these MacBook Pros have pretty much everything you'd want. Every model has 3 USB-C ports except for the base M3 model. Again, that one only has 2, but you've still got full-size HDMI. You've got an SD card slot on the side, which is great for professionals and photographers and tech bloggers who are working on photo editing, things like that. And battery life was also better than what we've seen with previous MacBook Pros. The 40-inch lasted 24 hours and 30 minutes in our benchmark. The 60-inch lasted 24 hours and 50 minutes. Again, these aren't really real-world numbers, but in my actual usage, I was able to go about maybe 2 days without needing to plug these computers in to recharge. And I think that's a pretty big change. I do think it's worth noting that Apple didn't send us the base $5099 M3 MacBook model, the 14-inch, which I think a lot of people are going to end up buying. Apple told us before that the old 13-inch MacBook Pro was their second best-selling laptop behind the MacBook Air, so that's probably still going to happen here. But I would really like to test that system just to see what 8 GB of RAM does for modern computing. When I look in Activity Monitor, I'm typically using like 12 to 14 GB of RAM, and that's just with web browsers and Slack and other things open. I'm just a tech blogger. Imagine how an actual professional dealing with huge images often is going to just chew up memory. Ultimately, I think that the base 14-inch MacBook Pro is kind of a cynical play by Apple, just like the 13-inch MacBook Pro. It is a system meant for somebody who really wants that Pro badge, but may downplay the limits of having not enough memory. And that could be a problem down the line. When we talk about computers, I always recommend people get at least 16 GB of RAM, because you're really going to feel the burn once you start stacking up browser tabs and heavy-hitting apps. Apple says that its memory is more efficient than typical PC memory, and there's something to it. But don't forget, you cannot upgrade RAM on these systems. Because the RAM is built onto the actual system chip, you can't add any down the line. That's different than older MacBook Pros and older Apple systems where you could buy a cheaper low-spec model and in a year or two throw some more RAM in there. That's just impossible. That's not going to change anytime soon. That's just the limits of running on mobile hardware at this point. It's something I've said for years, but it's still true. If you get at least 16 GB of RAM in the system, it will last you a lot longer. It'll last you years. So funny enough, my advice when it comes to buying the MacBook Pro M3s really echoes what I said with the M2s and with the M1s, to be honest. Don't buy the cheapest model. When you're looking at the rest of the lineup though, it's really hard to go wrong. The M3 chips are faster, they're more efficient, they get better battery life. It's everything I want in a computer upgrade, and it's also housed in some of the best cases you can find on the market today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned to Engadget for more laptop reviews.